we're done with the first major groups that help us in drawing and modifying our objects. I'm going to skip the next group, which is annotation, simply because it's a bit too advanced, and I want us to get to know layers first before we get to the dimensions and the annotations. AutoCAD allows us to work with layers, which helps us turning some of the details off when we don't need them to simplify our drawing, and then turning them back on without having to delete the information and redrawing it. So to do that, I'm just going to erase everything I have using the E command for erase. I'm going to select the objects and right click, so I end up with an empty screen or an empty drawing. I'm going to go to my layers right now, so I'm going to type layer. I'm going to click the enter button. Once I am there, and by the way, don't forget to add this to your command list. Once I'm there, once I activate the layer command, then I will end up with either a floating window or an attached window like this. If you already have it, then that's fine. If you don't, then this is how you activate it. You just type layer and you hit enter. Now, right here is a list of all the layers I have. 0 is the layer that I am on right now. So that means anything I draw will be drawn on the 0 layer. Now, because as interior designers, as we said, we group our lines and we try our best to save our objects, and we organize our files, every single layer needs to have a name, and every single line needs to belong to a layer. So the 0 layer is a layer that is embedded within AutoCAD, and we can't delete it, so we always keep it, but it's always empty. We should never have any drawings on them. Now, to start a new layer, I'm just going to click this little button at the top right here that says new layer, that has the yellow, I think it looks like a sun. This is how I see it. So I'm going to click on this new layer button right here, and you can see that once I do that, a new layer adds, and it's automatically named layer 1. Can I keep it as layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Of course you can do that, but that's not recommended, because when you end up with a document that is 100 layers big, you lose track of where your objects are located. So it's always better to name them. So say I want this to be the walls layer. I'm going to start a new layer, and I'm going to name it dimensions. And then I'm going to start a new layer, and I'm going to name it, say, text, and so on. I can always add layers as much as I find appropriate and whenever needed. So don't worry about having all the layers at once. At the beginning, that's fine. You can always add new layers later. Now, you can see that the 0 layer has a green tick next to it. That means it's the active layer. So it's right here. You can see that this green tick means it's the active layer. So anything I draw right now will be drawn on my 0 layer. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw something meaningful. So I'm going to draw a star. And you can see that this star is drawn on the 0 layer simply because the active layer, or this green tick, is right next to my 0 layer. That means anything I draw on it will be placed on it. Now, to change the active layer, you just double click on this icon. And now I have the walls layer activated. Or if I want the dimensions layer to be activated or to be the active layer, all I have to do is just double click on the status icon next to that layer, and I should have the green tick next to it. Alternatively, I can simply click on this button right up there, and it will automatically become the active layer. Now, to avoid confusion, we normally like to color code our layers, and so to make sure that I'm drawing in the correct layer, I need to color code it. So I'm going to click on this color square next to the walls layer, just a single short click, and I have a window opening up right now, and I can choose whatever color I want. So I'm going to use red. So now, because this is the active layer and it's red, anything I draw should be in red. Okay, so this is how I know that I make sure that I'm not mistakenly drawing on a wrong layer. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the colors for all my layers. Each layer has to have its own color. So I'm going to click on this black square, give it, say, a blue color, and then the dimensions, and give it, I don't know, a green color maybe. Now I have different layers, so now I know that if I'm writing something or using text, it needs to be in green. If I'm drawing a dimension, it needs to be in blue. If I'm drawing walls, they need to be in red. Now, to help us with managing our file, you can see that there is this small bulb that says on under the on column. You can always turn a layer on and off. So let's turn the walls layer off by clicking on this bulb. I'm going to make the dimensions layer active layer just so we avoid having a message coming up. I'm going to click on the bulb right here that is next to the walls layer. Once I click on it, you see that it turns blue and everything that is drawn on this layer will disappear. Now don't worry, it's still there. Once I turn it back on, I can see my my lines and everything that I drew before. Okay? Now I'm gonna freeze the layer. So by pressing on this sun button and on the freezing button right here, if it's frozen, I cannot see it and I cannot draw anything on it. Now the difference between turning a layer on and off and freezing a layer is that if a layer is turned off and it's the active layer, then you can still draw. So I'm gonna draw something right here. I'm gonna draw a rectangle. You can see that I don't know where I'm drawing. I don't see it simply because the active layer is turned off. I can turn it on by pressing on this light bulb, and you can see that the rectangle that I drew is still there. I just didn't see it because the layer was turned off. Now I cannot turn a frozen active, I cannot freeze an active layer, so you can see that if I press right here, it says it cannot be frozen because it's the current layer. So if I choose another layer to be the active layer and then press on the sun next to the walls layer, you can see that a freezing or a snowflake appears and that layer is frozen. Now I cannot draw it, I cannot draw on it, I cannot edit it, and I cannot see it. But the information is still there, the lines are still there. Once I unfreeze it, I can see the objects back on. I can also lock the layer, so I can lock it. So you can see how the color slightly changes into desaturated color. You can see the red color slightly becomes desaturated. Now, when a layer is locked, I'm going to make this the active layer. I can select the objects, but I cannot move them. I cannot erase them. I cannot do anything to them. I can only add new objects to that layer and they will automatically get locked once I do. So this new star is now locked. I cannot edit it. I can't select it, but I can't move it. I can't erase it. I can't change anything on it. So that is the difference between turning a layer on and off, freezing and unfreezing a layer, and locking a layer. Always make sure that everything you need is right in front of you. I always like to have my layers window open, just so in case I cannot write something or I lose my information, I have a quick look at the properties of that layer. A little disclaimer, anything that you change in the layer properties will affect everything that is placed on that layer unless you individually change the properties of that particular line or object, and we'll talk about that later. Now, since we're right here, let's talk about the line type. So if you click on this continuous word right over here under line type next to walls, you can see that a window appears, a list of line types that appears, but you only have continuous. What if you wanted a dashed line or a dotted line or a line that looks different? To do that, you need to load it, so you add it to your list. So you're gonna press on load and you're gonna select the line that you want or the line type that you want. Each, of course, line type has a different meaning and you'll get to know that as you progress through your major. So I'm gonna choose the dashed or maybe the dash dot line type, and I'm gonna click on OK. And now you can see that I have another new line type that appears. However, the line type of my layer is still continuous. That's because I added the possibility of that new line type, but I still did not assign it to my layers. So I'm gonna click on this one and I'm gonna click on OK. I'm gonna choose the new line type and click on OK. And you can see that now my walls have a new line type, and this line type is dashed, and that appears on this star. However, it did not show on this particular star. Now, when it doesn't show, you should look into two things. It's either because the line type scale is too big or too small. That means the dash, the size of the dash is too big, that it's covering the entire line, so you don't see what's after it, or that it's too small, that it looks like a solid line. To know, you just zoom in and you see it still looks like a solid line, so that means the line type scale is too big, and I'll show you where to change it later on. Now, I'm going to move forward to the line weight and click on the line weight right over here. And you can edit the thickness of your lines as you want. So say I want it to be 0.7, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, everything that is drawn on the walls layer has a thickness of 0.7, and you can see it here in the list. But it still does not show, it's still the same. To show the line weights, you need to go down to your shortcuts icons, press on the customization icon, which is the 3 lines right over here. Just a regular short press. Make sure that you have line weight ticked. So now I unticked it, I'm going to tick it again. And then I'm going to go, you should have a new icon appearing in the list right here that has these 3 lines, and they are deactivated, they are gray. Once you activate them, you can see that the line weights now appear. So if I'm going to deactivate them again by pressing on this icon, and you can see how my line weights disappear. Now these will show in printing, but you still cannot see them. That's only to simplify the view for us when we're working. I always like to keep them on so I can have more control over what's going to be printed and what's not. Of course, you can add transparency to your layers, and you can start working around your layer properties. Feel free to play around with them. If you have any questions, just let me know, write them down, and I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my knowledge. Now, going back to the properties of this particular line. So I have some objects that have the dashes appearing, while in other objects these dashes don't appear. So what I'm going to do is type PR for properties, and I am going to select the line that I have a problem with. Now here, any changes I make to the line will only affect the line itself and not the entire layer. So if I change the color from by layer, right now it's following the layer color. If I change it to blue, it still belongs to the walls layer. I only change the color of this individual line separately. So I'm gonna change it back to by layer, because I always like to keep them by layer, so you know that where your objects belong easily. I'm gonna select the line again, and I'm gonna scroll down to line type scale. Right here it says it's 1. We said it's a bit too big, so I'm gonna make it 0.5 and see how it looks. And you can see how right here these dashes started to appear. They're still too big, so I'm gonna go back right here, and I'm gonna reduce it slightly more. I'm gonna try 0.1, and I'm gonna keep on changing until I am happy with the size of my dash. Now notice how it still looks like a solid line, but if I zoom in, the dashes are too small, so I'm gonna make it slightly bigger by selecting the line again, and then going back to the line type scale and choose maybe 0.25 and see how it looks from far away. If you're happy, then you keep it. If not, then you keep on editing until everything works to however you want it to be. Please play around with your layer properties, with your object properties, but keep in mind that anything you change with the object properties will only affect the object and not the entire layer, and anything you change with the layer should affect anything that is following the layer properties. So right now this is by layer. The line type is still by layer. I can change it individually if that is what I want. I can also change the thickness individually. I always like to keep everything by layer as much as possible so that it follows the layer properties as much as possible. There's one more thing that I would like to help you with, a command called match properties, MA for match properties, and you press on enter. Now, whenever I want to copy the properties from one object to the other, so I edited this one and I liked it and I want to copy the same properties to the next object, all I do is type MA for match properties and then hit enter. It says select the source object, so I want to copy the properties of this line, so I'm going to select this line. This is the source, and I want to copy the properties to this line. So notice how now each of these lines is following the properties that I added to that original line. Once I'm done, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to exit the command. So this is how we deal with layers. Feel free to play around, explore, and understand what each property has to do with and how it affects your drawing. And if you have any questions, write them down and I'll be happy to answer them. Please watch the next recording to know how to draw dimensions and how to add text to your drawings.